The air inside the shooting range was thick with the metallic scent of gunpowder and the quiet hum of anticipation. Rows of competitors adjusted their rifles, checking scopes, reloading magazines, and whispering among themselves. This was no ordinary gathering. It was the town's annual marksmanship championship, a place where reputations were built and broken in a single pull of a trigger. Every eye in the room seemed focused on the reigning champion, a tall, confident man who carried himself with the certainty of someone who had never been challenged. And then she walked in, a simple woman in modest clothes, carrying no flashy gear, no custom case, and no entourage. Just her calm presence and a quiet determination that no one seemed to notice. Heads turned briefly, then smirks followed. Some competitors chuckled under their breath. One leaned to another and whispered, "She's in the wrong place. This isn't for beginners." Even the champion, smirking from his station, shook his head dismissively. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her footsteps echoed softly against the concrete floor as she made her way to the far lane, the murmurs of doubt following her like shadows. The silence grew heavier, not with respect but with condescension. The first round of shooters fired, the sharp cracks of rifles splitting the air. Applause followed, especially when the champion posted yet another near-perfect score. Cheers echoed as if the outcome of the day had already been decided. Then, almost unnoticed, her name was called. She stepped forward, placed her hands on the rifle, and took her position. The crowd leaned in, some curious, most ready to watch her fail. She breathed in slowly, her eyes steady, her movements deliberate. A hush fell across the room. And then bang! The shot rang out, echoing louder than any before it. The scoreboard lit up. A perfect bullseye. Not just accuracy, record-breaking precision. The room froze. Smirks vanished. Mouths opened in shock. For the first time, all eyes weren't on the champion. They were on her. She wasn't born into this world of competition and polished weapons, nor was she raised with the luxury of private coaches or expensive rifles. Her life had been simple, almost humble, shaped by early mornings on a small family farm where work came before play, and silence was as natural as the sunrise. She grew up learning patience from the fields, precision from tending to livestock, and resilience from a father who believed that skill meant more than appearance. It was in those quiet dawns with an old rifle handed down from her grandfather that she first discovered the rhythm of steady breathing, the art of stillness, and the power of a single shot well placed. The shooting range today was nothing like the calm fields of her youth. Bright fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Walls were lined with posters of champions past, and the air carried a constant tension of competition. Around her, competitors wore custom shooting jackets, specialized gloves, and carried rifles worth more than her family's old pickup truck. They laughed loudly, comparing brands and discussing recoil control as though she were invisible. At the center of it all stood the champion, a man who wore his medals like armor, the undisputed star of the range. His reputation stretched far beyond this town. Stories of his skill traveled through competitions, whispered like gospel by those who admired him. To him, today wasn't a challenge. It was another stage where he would collect praise. And that was why her presence unsettled so many. She didn't fit the part. Her clothes were worn, her rifle scratched and outdated, and her demeanor too quiet for the roaring spectacle this event had become. Even the announcer, reading her name from the list, stumbled slightly as though surprised she had signed up at all. But behind her calm exterior was a reservoir of discipline forged in years of solitude. While others trained in state-of-the-art facilities, she trained against wind that never stopped blowing, against silence that never offered encouragement, and against the doubt that no one ever thought she could overcome. Her setting was the farm, the woods, the open fields where every shot mattered, because every mistake meant lost time, lost effort, or missed survival. That difference mattered more than anyone realized. The shooting range had become a battlefield of reputation, but for her, it was no different than the still morning air back home. She was steady because life had taught her to be steady. She was accurate because necessity had demanded she be accurate. And she was ready because being underestimated was nothing new. As she adjusted her stance and quietly prepared her rifle, she wasn't thinking of medals or crowds. She was thinking of the farm, of the discipline her father instilled, of the many mornings she had lined up her shot with nothing but instinct and patience to guide her. Around her the crowd's energy pulsed, but inside she carried a silence that could not be shaken. That silence was about to change everything. The competition moved forward with the confidence of those who thought the outcome was already written. The champion fired his rounds with ease, drawing cheers from the crowd each time his bullet cut the center of the target. His rivals, polished and proud, followed with near-perfect scores that seemed to confirm the hierarchy of the day. And then there was her, quiet, steady, and overlooked. She stood in the far lane where the shadows of the range lights fell, ignored by the announcer except when her turn came. Yet every time she raised her rifle, the room shifted. The first shot had silenced the whispers, but the second confirmed it was no fluke. "Bullseye again!" A ripple of unease spread among the competitors, though they masked it with nervous laughter. "Beginner's luck," one muttered, but his voice betrayed a hint of doubt. By the third round, her score stood higher than several decorated shooters. The crowd began to murmur. A few leaned forward, curious now, though others crossed their arms in defiance, unwilling to admit the balance of the day might be changing. The champion smirked, but it was thinner than before, his confidence challenged in ways he hadn't expected. He fired again, hitting near perfect, but when her shot rang out, dead center once more, the applause shifted. It wasn't loud, not yet, but it was growing. The tension was no longer hidden. She had entered a game meant to dismiss her, but instead, she was rewriting it with every shot. That was the conflict taking root, not just on the range, but in the pride of those who had ignored her. The competitors began adjusting nervously, double-checking their sights, wiping sweat from their brows. Their easy arrogance faltered as her calm precision continued without pause. She didn't gloat. She didn't even look their way. She remained focused on the target, on the discipline of her breath, the stillness of her hands. But her success was louder than any celebration. Each bullseye was a challenge thrown into the air, demanding acknowledgement, eroding the illusion that only champions born of prestige could dominate here. The conflict grew sharper outside the firing line, too. Spectators whispered in corners, debating how someone so ordinary could outperform those trained for years. Judges exchanged glances, checking her scores again and again as if searching for errors. Even the announcer's voice wavered, uncertain whether to dismiss her as a lucky anomaly or recognize her as the rising force of the day. And through it all, she stayed steady. She didn't need their approval or their validation. She knew what she had brought with her, the lessons of patience, the strength of silence, and a lifetime of being underestimated. This was her weapon, sharper than any rifle in the room. The conflict wasn't just about who could hit the center of the target anymore. It was about pride, about power, about the uncomfortable realization that greatness sometimes walks in quietly, without permission, and demands its place. The room that once carried laughter and casual arrogance had grown heavier with every round she fired. By now, her name was no longer whispered as a footnote, but spoken in low, urgent tones as the scoreboard revealed what many didn't want to accept. She was tied with some of the top-ranked shooters. The champion, who once basked in the effortless glow of applause, found himself stealing glances toward her lane, his smirk fading into something sharper, more strained. It wasn't supposed to be like this. In his world, challengers came dressed in polished uniforms, with reputations already built, not a simple woman whose rifle looked borrowed from another time. Yet here she was, refusing to falter. Every shot echoed like a declaration, rattling the pride of those who thought the competition was theirs to claim. The tension bled into the crowd as well. Families who had come to cheer the familiar faces began shifting in their seats, drawn to the growing spectacle. Some clapped cautiously when her score rose again, while others muttered in frustration, unwilling to cheer for someone who disrupted the predictable story they came to witness. And still, she remained steady, her breathing measured, her movements calm. She didn't hear the whispers, or perhaps she chose not to. She only saw the target, only felt the weight of the rifle balanced against her shoulder, only trusted the rhythm she had known since her youth. By the halfway point of the competition, murmurs turned into debates. Was she really that good, or was the champion underperforming? Was this an anomaly, or had the room ignored someone truly exceptional? Each round fueled the fire, pushing the tension higher until even the judges seemed unsettled. They leaned closer to their monitors, verifying her shots with extra care, their pens hovering as though afraid to commit to numbers that seemed too perfect. The champion began to sweat. His movements grew sharper, more aggressive, as if force could replace precision. His shots still struck true, but the grace had faded, replaced by an urgency that betrayed his fear. For the first time in years, his crown felt unstable. Every time he fired, he wasn't only competing against the target, but against the calm figure on the far lane who never seemed shaken, never rushed, never failed. And then came the near miss. A single shot from him that landed just outside the center, enough to drop his score. The crowd gasped. He clenched his jaw, his frustration spilling through his mask of control. And she, almost as if in response, fired her next round with flawless precision, claiming the center as though it belonged to her alone. The scoreboard lit up, the gap between them narrowing to almost nothing. The crowd erupted, divided between disbelief and reluctant admiration. For the first time, applause for her was louder than for him. The rising tension transformed into something undeniable, a storm building, threatening to overturn the order that had stood unchallenged for too long. The other competitors faded into the background, their scores overshadowed by the duel that was forming between the reigning champion and the quiet woman who had been dismissed the moment she walked in. Each shot now carried more than points. It carried pride, reputation, and the weight of an audience that couldn't look away. She never looked at him, but he couldn't stop looking at her. And in that imbalance, the tension reached its peak. The simple woman, the one who had been ignored, had become the center of the entire arena. The scoreboard flickered as the competition edged toward its final rounds, numbers so close that every shot could decide the outcome. The champion's jaw was tight, his hands no longer steady but trembling slightly as the pressure weighed on him. He wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to being chased, to being questioned, to feeling the ground shift beneath him. And yet, the shift was undeniable because she was still there, calm as ever, her breathing even, her eyes never leaving the target. The whispers in the crowd grew into an unmistakable buzz. Everyone knew something historic was about to happen, though few wanted to admit it out loud. The announcer's voice cracked slightly as he repeated her name. This time, not dismissively, but with the tone of someone forced to acknowledge a rising star. The champion tried to regain his composure, firing his next shot with precision, but it landed just shy of perfection. The gap narrowed further, and then her turn came. She stepped forward, shoulders squared, fingers brushing against the rifle as though it were an extension of her own body. Silence fell, so complete that the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead seemed deafening. She inhaled slowly, exhaled, and pulled the trigger. The shot tore through the air and landed dead center. The scoreboard jumped. Gasps rippled through the room. She had overtaken the champion. For the first time in the competition's history, the reigning king was no longer in first place. The turning point was undeniable. The crowd shifted uneasily, torn between loyalty to the champion and awe for the woman rewriting the story before their eyes. Judges leaned forward, some nodding slowly, others exchanging glances that spoke volumes. This was no fluke. This was real. The champion's face reddened, his smirk gone, replaced by a thin line of determination mixed with disbelief. He slammed another round into his rifle, his movements jerky, unpracticed under such pressure. His shot rang out, strong but imperfect again, and the gap widened. He looked across the lanes at her for the first time, not with dismissal, but with recognition of an equal, perhaps even a superior. She didn't return his look. She didn't need to. Her eyes stayed on the target, steady as stone. The crowd erupted, no longer able to contain themselves. Some clapped wildly, others argued among themselves, but all knew they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered long after the echoes of gunfire faded. The champion had been challenged, and the woman who had walked in, ignored, dismissed, and underestimated, was now standing at the edge of victory. The final round had arrived. The air was electric, buzzing with anticipation, tension that had built for hours now snapping like a live wire. Every competitor had fired their last shots. Every eye was locked on the scoreboard, and all attention converged on the quiet woman who had rewritten the day. The champion's face was pale, his confidence shattered by the unrelenting precision she displayed. He gripped his rifle with a force that betrayed his panic. Yet even he knew it would take more than brute strength to match her calm mastery. She stepped up for her last shot, her hands steady, her posture flawless, as if the world had narrowed down to the center of the target. The room fell silent, every spectator holding their breath, every whisper frozen. She inhaled slowly, a rhythm honed over years of practice, and exhaled just enough to steady her aim. Time seemed to stretch, each heartbeat echoing in the cavernous room. Then, bang! The bullet struck the exact center, a perfect bullseye, the kind that made experienced judges pause and recheck the score. The scoreboard flashed, confirming the impossible. The room erupted. Gasps, cheers, and stunned silence collided as the announcement reverberated. She had broken the championship record. The champion slumped in disbelief, his eyes wide, mouth opening and closing without words, unable to reconcile the defeat. Competitors muttered and murmured among themselves, some in awe, some in frustration, realizing that the hierarchy they had relied upon had collapsed. The judges approached, verifying every shot, nodding slowly, their expressions a mix of respect and astonishment. The crowd pressed forward, cameras raised, capturing the historic moment. She remained calm, almost serene, allowing the applause and shock to wash over her without a trace of arrogance. The champion finally stood, walking toward her, extending a hand not in challenge but in acknowledgement. Their eyes met for the first time, an unspoken exchange of respect passing between them. It was not about pride, not about humiliation, it was about recognition. Recognition of skill, discipline, and quiet strength that had been underestimated until now. As she lowered her rifle, the reality of her achievement settled in. Every whisper of doubt, every smirk of condescension, every underestimation had led to this moment. The room buzzed, the applause didn't fade, and yet she stood composed, aware that the day's true victory wasn't just breaking a record, but showing the world the power of focus, patience, and the courage to step forward when least expected. She had arrived unnoticed, dismissed by all, and now she had redefined the meaning of respect at the shooting range. The champion, humbled, nodded once more before turning to address the crowd, his voice heavy with acknowledgement. She had not just won, she had shattered expectation. And in that single, decisive moment, silence, tension, pride, and disbelief fused into a climax that would be remembered for generations. The echo of her final shot lingered in the air long after the gun had been lowered, filling the room with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Spectators who had once doubted her now whispered in reverence, some shaking their heads in astonishment, others smiling with admiration for the quiet woman who had rewritten history. The champion, who had dominated the range for years, stood silently beside her, humbled, finally understanding that skill was not measured by bravado or reputation, but by focus, discipline, and unwavering calm. Cameras flashed, capturing every angle, every expression, every gasp of astonishment, but she remained composed, her face serene, her shoulders steady. She had come here unnoticed, underestimated, and now she was the center of attention, not through arrogance, but through undeniable excellence. Judges approached, handing her the official certificates and recognition for breaking the record, their nods heavy with respect. She accepted them quietly, aware that the real victory was not just on paper, but in proving that true talent can exist anywhere, in anyone, and often in the most unexpected places. The crowd began to disperse slowly, buzzing with excitement, discussing the shots, the precision, and the calm determination that had won the day. Some competitors approached her, tentative at first, then with genuine admiration, asking questions, seeking advice, or simply acknowledging her skill. The champion shook her hand, a silent gesture of respect that spoke more than words ever could. She smiled softly, understanding that the respect she had earned was the kind that lasts, built on action rather than noise. Outside the shooting range, the sun began to set. casting long shadows and bathing the scene in warm, golden light. It was the kind of light that makes ordinary moments feel monumental, the kind of moment she would carry quietly in her heart for the rest of her life. She looked around once, noticing the lingering expressions on faces, the mix of pride, astonishment, and humility, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not satisfaction from fame or applause, but from knowing that perseverance, patience, and quiet strength had finally been recognized. As she packed her rifle, the murmurs of the crowd faded, leaving her alone with the memories of every early morning, every lonely hour of practice, and every moment of doubt she had faced before stepping into this range. Those experiences had forged her, shaping a skill that demanded acknowledgement not through ego, but through precision. She walked away slowly, the weight of her achievement balanced by humility, carrying with her a lesson far larger than any championship. A lesson that reverberates beyond the walls of the range. True excellence is silent, unstoppable, and impossible to ignore. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. It simply proves itself, leaving those who doubted in awe and those who believed inspired. And in that quiet triumph, she understood that the story of her first shot breaking the record would live on. Not because she sought recognition, but because greatness has a way of speaking for itself, no matter how simple the messenger.